good morning. Here's the titular head. I've never been a titular head before. But it's really nice to see all of you here in Stockholm. And it's also really nice to say hello to the people in a number of other places, in a number of other countries who are watching this event by streaming. So we're doing our technology. So I'm going to kick this off with this presentation called The Scientific Foundation. And I just want to explain right off that in the next 45 minutes, I'm not going to tell the whole foundation. In fact, there are three of us this morning and this afternoon who are hitting different aspects of the scientific foundation of parental alienation. So I'm going to do one piece, and Dr. Amy Baker is going to do another piece, and Dr. Steve Miller is going to do another piece. And I think that if you kind of fit them together, you'll get a sense of the foundation that we're talking about. So this is my outline, and I'm going to start with our definition. Got to warn you, people have slightly different definitions of parental alienation, but let's, at least for the moment, let's see if we can be on the same page. That we're talking about a child, usually one whose parents are engaged in a high conflict separation or divorce. The child allies himself strongly with one parent and rejects the relationship with the other parent without legitimate justification. And as most of you know all about this, the one big factor is that this usually takes place in the context of divorce, although it doesn't have to, it occasionally happens in intact families. And secondly, the really key thing is that it's without justification. If the child rejects a parent for a good reason, it's something else. It's not alienation. So, in general, especially in severe cases, the alienation results in a false belief. It's almost, you can think of it as it's almost like a delusion that the rejected parent has been abused. And the false belief sometimes gives rise to false memories. That if you think about a false belief long enough and talk about it, sometimes children start to develop memories of things that never happened, or they're called memories of non-events. And some people like this kind of thing. So in our terminology, this little squiggle right here is parental alienation. In other words, it's a child rejecting the alienated parent, and it's in this relationship. And this thing over here is the alienating behaviors. In other words, the things that this parent does to cause it to happen. And this is what most people would consider child abuse. It's child abuse to have all these alienating behaviors that cause the parental alienation. And just to make sure we're on the same page, let's just briefly clarify mild, moderate, and severe, at least the definitions that some of us use. This is a very simplified definition. Mild is the child doesn't want to go see the other parent, but when he goes, everything is okay. Moderate is the child doesn't want to go see the other parent, and when he goes, he's oppositional and difficult. Severe, the child doesn't want to go see the other parent, and he doesn't go. So that's a very simple way to define mild, moderate, and severe. We might need that later on in this little presentation. So what I want to start with, my little piece of this scientific basis, has to do with the fact that alienation, the concept, is accepted by many other organizations, by many professional organizations. And you think about it, that's not really a very good way to prove that something is scientific. I mean, it's a roundabout way. In other words, we're saying parental alienation is scientific because all these organizations have said that it's scientific. I understand. It's a roundabout way of proving that we're scientific. And so this isn't the whole picture. This is only one part of the whole picture. But there's a reason why I want you to start with this. First of all, is for all of us to feel like we're in really good company. There's many, many psychiatrists and psychologists and social workers who agree that this is a problem. But I'm bringing this up because there are a few people who say that it's not accepted by other organizations, and they are mistaken when they say that. This fellow Peter Jaffe is a perfectly respectable I think he's a psychologist in Canada, and he said, although PAS has not been recognized by any major mental health or legal association, it's in the justice system. And Jennifer Holt is a attorney, law professor who is a very negative person about parental alienation. She says PAS lacks indicia of acceptance by major medical institutions. My point right now is that these people are wrong. Is that this kind of thing is stated? That this kind of thing is stated. Is this okay? Is it even on? Hey, is this better? It's now turned on. Thank you. Tell me if it's a problem. So my point is that when people say that it's not accepted and they publish this, they are wrong, and we need to be able to show. This is a very simple thing to show that they're wrong, because I'm going to give you several organizations that have accepted parental alienation as a concept. So I'm going to run through these organizations. Here's one that I belong to, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. That they actually call this an official action. This was a practice guideline on how to conduct a child custody evaluation. And they have a heading. One of the sections of this document is a heading that says parental alienation. And it refers to the idea that there are times during a custody dispute when a child can become extremely hostile toward one of the parents, and you have to assess that. So this is a little bit chronological. This goes back 20 years. That this American, the biggest organization of child psychiatry, endorsed the idea of alienation. So let me ask the people in the back, are you able to hear me now? Yes. Are we doing okay? Yes. Now here's a couple of things from this other big organization called AFCC, the Association of Family Conciliation Courts, and they also had a custody, how to do a custody evaluation, and they also talk about parental alienation from 1997. Oops, I'm sorry, I went backwards. Which is right here, and they refer to how you might need specialized training to talk about assessment of children's resistance and allegations of attempts to alienate children. So here's a really famous organization, AFCC in the United States. And actually, there's an international organization that seems to accept the reality of parental alienation. Here's another survey that was done at an AFCC meeting, and we surveyed the audience, 300 people, and 98% of them agreed with the idea that there are some children are manipulated by one parent to reject the other parent. So that's another good example. Here's a different organization. APSAC is this organization in the United States called the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children. So this is a big organization having to do with child abuse. And in one of their documents, this is an official document, a position paper, they say they're talking about interpersonal violence, and if that's not what is going on, that there might be an attempt to alienate the child from the parent. And then APSAC also has a more recent document. This is also an official document of this organization on the investigation of suspected psychological maltreatment. And in that document this is a little cut and paste from the actual document, but it describes parental alienation, that child psychological abuse might involve restricting or interfering with or directly undermining the child's important relationships, like telling the child the lack of communication is due to the other parent's lack of love, or placing the child in a loyalty conflict by making the child unnecessarily choose to have a relationship with one parent or the other. So this is a big, big organization that describes in their document what we're talking about. And I should point out that these things don't happen by accident. That there are people who are involved with these committees that write these position papers, and one of them is sitting in the front row right here, who's Amy Baker, that she helped to write this, and she helped to get this phraseology inserted inserted into this document of this really important organization. In other words, my point is that when people say that it's not accepted by professional organizations, it's easy to prove that they're lying. They're basically lying when they say that. And it's easy to show that it's not correct. Here's another one. They talk about the American Psychological Association. The APA has a series of books that they publish called the APA Handbooks. And one of them is the APA Handbook of Forensic Psychology. And in that book, it has a chapter on how to do a custody evaluation. And one of the headings in this chapter is on child alienation. And they talk about the different people who are involved with parental alienation. They talk about Wallerstein, Richard Gardner, Kelly and Johnston, and so on. In other words, this is a book that's not just published by the American Psychological Association. It's the official book commissioned by the American Psychological Association that has an entire section on this topic. So I'm just trying to make a point here. That when people say that it's not accepted by organizations, they're wrong. This is sort of an argument. This famous book by Clower and Rivlin was published by the American Bar Association, and that this study was commissioned by the family law part of the ABA. So this is another example. I know some of you are from Italy, I think. We're going to be coming here today, and there's an organization in Italy it's called SINPIA, which I can tell you what this means. This is a professional organization of physicians who are neuropsychiatrists, the neurologists and psychiatrists of children, and they have guidelines on child abuse. And if that's in Italian, but in English, these guidelines actually say that psychological child abuse includes the alienation of a parent figure by the other until the cooperation of a child in parental alienation syndrome. So this is just a really good example that we're not just talking about the United States, but there are other countries where professional organizations recognize this condition. So this topic comes up about what about the DSM-5? And we tried real hard to get the words in the DSM, and they're not. The words parental alienation are not in the DSM-5, but the concept is there. The concept is there. And in 3 different diagnoses, if you read this top one, it's such an awkward name, child affected by parental relationship distress. And there's a little definition of it, negative effects of parental relationship discord on a child and the family. Well, that's a paraphrase of parental alienation, that the child is affected by conflict between the parents. And parent-child relational problem is a paraphrase of parental alienation and child psychological abuse. So we didn't get our total wish that the actual words were not in the book, but the concept is there. And the biggest one is this, the child, we call this CAPRD, child affected by parental relationship distress. That this was never in the DSM before. This was a brand new diagnosis that was put there, and the people who put it there discussed parental alienation as a thing that they were interested in. It only consists of this one sentence. I mean, it's really unusual to have a DSM diagnosis that only consists of one sentence, but there it is. And it doesn't simply refer to parental alienation. That children affected by family conflict, this includes kids who are affected by domestic violence, by kids who have loyalty conflicts because their mom and dad are in a fight, and the kid is caught in the middle, and kids with parental alienation. So CAPRD covers a lot of territory. Okay, now we did score with ICD-11. It came out a couple months ago. We did the same thing. We campaigned to get the words parental alienation into ICD-11. And the result is we sort of got the words in. That it is interesting that the actual words, alienation and estrangements, are in the index of ICD-11. What that means is they're not a separate diagnosis. They don't have their own code. But if you go to the ICD-11 and you go online and it says search term, if you search for parental alienation, it recognizes it. It recognizes the term and it takes you to caregiver-child relationship problem. And everything in the DSM and the ICD, many of them have index terms, and alienation and estrangement are in that. So that was pretty close. I was happy with that because to me it means that the people who wrote that book recognize the reality of alienation and estrangement. That even though it's not exactly everything we wanted, it seems that I would say that it's recognized by the ICD. Here's just a couple more things. Here's an encyclopedia that talks about parental alienation, a big encyclopedia of forensic science. Here's another encyclopedia, which incidentally is the Encyclopedia of Clinical Psychology, and it gives this definition. So look at this definition real quick. Alienation, mental condition in a child, usually one whose parents are engaged in high conflict separation or divorce, allies himself with one parent and a just relationship with the other parent. That's our definition, isn't it? You might think that the people who wrote this encyclopedia copied our definition. So in any case, I think I proved my point. That there are people who say that alienation is not recognized, but it really is. There's another reason why this comes up in the United States. I don't know so much in other countries. But in the United States, if you want to testify about something in court, you have to prove that the concept is scientific, that it's generally accepted by the relevant scientific community. That's one way to prove. There are other ways, but that's one way to prove that a concept is scientific and it should be accepted in court. So that's used. All this material I've just given you is really pertinent in the United States because you can go to court and say to the judge, I can show evidence that this is generally accepted by professional organizations in this country. That might be less relevant in other countries, but that's one of the reasons why I wanted to present that notion in this meeting. So the next, as I said, that's a roundabout way to talk about the scientific basis of this concept. But let's move on to research, more traditional research. And during the course of today, you're going to hear different comments about research, and some of it is qualitative, and some of it is quantitative. And we just need to be on the same page here. Qualitative research is descriptive. People write an article and say, well, this psychiatrist in Turkey wrote an article and said, I saw a family and they had this, what appeared to be what's called parental alienation. Or somebody from Malaysia will write an article and it's descriptive. There are no statistics. Quantitative research is when you can systematically study something, you have statistics, you can measure it. It's more objective perhaps. Both of these are important. Generally, when a new topic comes under consideration in science, generally qualitative studies come first. That people describe a phenomenon, and then later people study it more systematically. But I don't know if you're aware, but we have this database that's online. You can go to it's at my university at Vanderbilt, but it's online. It's obviously free, and we have hundreds of articles and books and book chapters. Most of them have to do with qualitative research, and a smaller number have to do with quantitative research. So in my part here, I'm going to mainly tell you about qualitative research, and the other people later today are going to talk a little bit more about quantitative. So this has to do with qualitative research, in that when parental alienation was first described in the 1980s, there were 6 different groups, researchers, at least 6, that described the same thing. They had different names for it. Wallerstein called it pathological alignment. Richard Gardner called it PAS. Leona Kapetsky, a social worker in Colorado, did a whole lot of research, and when she got to the very end of it, she learned about Richard Gardner, And she said, what I've been studying seems very similar to what this Gardner guy has been describing. Clower and Rivlin are those two people who wrote this big book called Children Held Hostage. They call it indoctrination and brainwashing. Janet Johnston and her people call it alignments. Barry Brooklyn is an interesting psychologist in Philadelphia, and he developed these tests called the Brooklyn test, and he had this concept, he called it not based on actual interactions, and he had this abbreviation, NBOAI. And what he meant by that is that in some custody evaluations, children develop very strong opinions. They totally reject a parent, very strong opinion, and it's not based on actual interaction, that it's based on the child's own thoughts or on brainwashing. So what I'm trying to say here, and I said this in court a number of times, to try to make the idea that here are 6 different researchers in the 1980s who independently, or almost independently, describe the same thing. And that's very important. It's qualitative, it's descriptive, there are very few statistics here, but when 6 different groups of people describe almost the same thing, to me that's very powerful. And that's how research starts, is with qualitative studies. And Gardner himself is a really good example of a person who did qualitative research, because he described parental alienation syndrome in several different books and in articles, and he eventually did a little bit of quantitative studies, but most of his study was simply descriptive. And some people complain, some people who don't like this idea say that Gardner had no empirical evidence. People say this over and over again. I think they copy from one another. And this is not true, that he had a mountain of empirical evidence. He had hundreds of cases. And he collected data and he organized it into a syndrome. And why isn't that scientific? I mean, to tell the truth, that's what doctors, that's what physicians have done for hundreds of years. And I use this example of Huntington's disease. This fellow named George Huntington, who, I don't know if you're in the United States, he was from Long Island in New York, in the United States. And his father was a physician, and his father kept really good records and identified several people in his community who had this funny disease with chorea. And then George took over the practice, and he had a couple more generations. So it was really interesting. In the 19th century, in the 1870s, he's out there systematically collecting cases, and he published it, and that's called Huntington's disease. In other words, my point is simply that what Richard Gardner did is what physicians have always done, is they've collected cases and then they publish it and says that this might be a new condition to think about. So this is qualitative. Let me give you one more example of qualitative research, which I think is a good example. Richard Warshak, who almost everybody is familiar with his book called Divorce Poison. Divorce Poison is a second edition now, and it's been republished in several different countries, Croatia and Japan and Korea and so on. And as far as I know, this is the most widely read book in the world on parental alienation. Most of you, I think, have read this book. And it's purely descriptive. Warshak is a wonderful writer. He's able to bring things to life, and he has dozens of interesting cases, little case vignettes. There aren't any statistics in this book, but this is the most widely read book in the world on this topic, and it's a really good example of qualitative, descriptive research. So when we wrote our book, this book that came out a few years ago, we developed a bibliography in this book, and we tried to find articles from a lot of different countries, and we found hundreds of articles from all over the world in these countries. Actually, this is a few years ago, so I think now we have even more articles. So you can find all these. I mentioned earlier we have this database called the Parental Alienation Database, and in fact, on your program book, on the back cover, it actually gives the inside back cover, it gives the website for how to access the database, and you can search by country if you want. Or some people say they really just want more recent publications, and so you can actually search by year. And and so on. So I've given you sort of an overview here, and I want to tell you about a very specific research topic that really amounts to quantitative research. If people want to talk about research, I think it's good for them to give you a very specific thing that they're trying to prove. And in this case, the question I'm asking is there a difference between a loyalty conflict and parental alienation? And can it be shown quantitatively? That's what I'm asking you to think about. So, loyalty conflicts are when the child is caught between two parents, the parents are arguing, the child feels affection for both parents, but it's very difficult because the parents are arguing with each other. The child is caught in the middle. That's a very difficult situation. And people have talked, there's nothing new about this. Let me just mention some of these people. Like Murray Bowen is a family therapy person, and he described triangulation. And triangulation would result in the child being caught in a loyalty conflict between the parents. And Salvador Minuchin is another person, and he described cross-generational coalition, and that's another way in which a child might be caught between two parents, although the child tends to attach to one or the other of the parents. So my point, I'm simply going to say that the idea of loyalty conflict has been around for a long time. But here's my scientific question. Is it possible to show scientifically that there's a difference between a loyalty conflict and parental alienation? And one reason why this comes up is because loyalty conflicts are very similar to mild parental alienation, in a behavioral sense. I told you that in mild PA, the child says, I don't want to go see my other parent, but he goes anyway, and once he gets there, he's fine. So I think that the children who have mild PA and the children who have loyalty conflicts are almost the same group of children, although maybe not exactly. So, in this thing, what we're trying to address here is it possible to tell the difference. This article that we wrote a year or so ago actually talks about the difference between a loyalty conflict and PA. And actually, if you recall, this is this new diagnosis in DSM-5, CAPRD. And one of the things we try to do in this article is what I'm telling you about right now. Is there a difference between a loyalty conflict and alienation? So do you think there is? Do you think there's a scientific way that you can measure? Is there something that's measurable that's different in these groups of children? So first of all, PA is more serious because in PA you essentially develop a delusion. In loyalty conflict, the parents say bad things about each other, but the child tries to get along with both of them. In PA, the parents say bad things about each other, but the child gravitates to one parent and shuns the second parent. So is it possible to measure? I think it is. And the difference is an interesting difference. And I'm going to tell you what the result is, and then I'm going to show you the research. In a loyalty conflict, the parents say bad things about each other, and the child gravitates to the parent the bad things are being said. The parent who is the most victimized in loyalty conflict is the child somehow feels sorry for or identifies with the parent who is the victim of the name calling and tends to think that parent is a little bit better. You follow me? That if the two parents say bad things, the child tends to attach more to the parent who's being denigrated. But as you know, in alienation is just the opposite. That the parent says bad things about the other parent, and the child agrees with the parent who's saying the bad things. So that's interesting. And so the question is, can that be measured? So I'm telling you the result of some research. And both of these articles were just published in the last few months by these people, a couple of psychologists. And parental denigration is the parents saying bad things about each other. And that they say that it boomerangs because the child attaches to the parent who's being denigrated. You follow that? Well, in parental alienation, It's the other way around, that the alienated children engage in splitting, and they perceive the preferred parent positively and the rejected parent negatively. So to me, that's really intriguing, that a loyalty conflict is bad, and parental alienation is worse. Parental alienation can go to mild, moderate, and severe. And somewhere along the line, the child switches from having a bit of an alliance with the victim parent to having total rejection of the victim parent. And this article right here is what my colleagues and I published a few months ago. Now, I really think this is a great article. I refer to this as here, let me tell you what happens here. What we showed was by giving this questionnaire, you ask the children about the father and about the mother, and you can measure the child's attachment to the mom and the dad. And I refer to this as my Nobel Prize article, because this is the best article I ever wrote in terms of research. And here I am in Stockholm, and I have to tell you that I have not yet gotten the Nobel Prize. But I am here in case the committee wants to talk to me about it. Because I want to show you the results. These results are really, really dramatic. That this line here are children who are alienated from their father, and their opinion of their father is extremely negative, and their opinion of their mother is extremely positive. And these children here are alienated from their mother. Their opinion of their mother is extremely negative, and of their father is extremely positive. These results are just beyond significance in statistics. That comparing these are the alienated children, and these are the other non-alienated children. The significance level of the difference between these and these was so high that when the peer reviewers saw this, one peer reviewer said, "This is impossible. It's impossible to have this level of significance, and that we must have done it wrong," or something like that. But I'm just trying to show you this as an example of quantitative research, and it's answering the question: is it possible to tell the difference between loyalty conflict and alienation? So here's another person who tried to say this exact same thing. Let's read through this together real quick. And see if you can figure out who said this, by the way. A child can become paralyzed when caught in the middle of a loyalty conflict toward his parents, and he can no longer bear the ambivalence of power and helplessness. A frequently observed defensive reaction of the child is a sudden and exaggerated taking of sides. In other words, you have an unrealistic black and white, good and bad kind of thinking. In other words, the person who wrote this is describing a transition between a loyalty conflict and a parental alienation. Does anybody have any idea who wrote this? The only person who might is Wilfred, because he knows the author of this. There's a German psychiatrist, I think his name is Gerald Lozinski, and he published this 20 years ago in a journal in the United States. In other words, what we're talking about here is something that clinicians have observed, that you can have this transition, this movement from a loyalty situation to an alienation situation. And here's somebody who described this even before, and he didn't even know what parental alienation was when he wrote this article. Let me just give you one more example, and then we're wrapping up. This is an example of the same thing, transition from a loyalty to PA, described by a 14-year-old girl. She was severely alienated from her dad. She went to a treatment program, or an intervention program, one of these 4-day intervention programs. She came home, and she was reevaluated by the people who sent her. And she said something really interesting to her psychologist that she described back in the old days, in the beginning. I wanted both parents. I was mad I couldn't be with both of them all the time. She's describing how painful it is to be caught between two parents in a loyalty conflict. And then she said, I felt like I had to love just one. It was easier to pick one rather than be with both of them. And it's really interesting. I mean, this is a 15 teenager who just an everyday interview is able to describe what was going on in her head as she experienced loyalty and then she experienced parental alienation. So that's an example where you ask a scientific question, you say, can this be proved scientifically? There's another really, really good question, which is it possible to tell the difference between parental alienation and estrangement? So that's is it when the rejection is due to a good reason or not a good reason? So that's another really good question to research. And I'm not going to answer that. This is a question. But other people later today are going to answer that. In other words, I'm trying to create a little transition here from my presentation. Amy Baker is going to be next, and she's going to talk about some aspect of this, because this is a really important research question. And Dr. Stephen Miller is later this afternoon, and he's going to be discussing this same topic. So this is what I try to do today. I try to show that yes, it is accepted, parental alienation is accepted in the scientific community. And I have 9 or 10 different organizations where I hope I prove that to you. I hope I convinced you of that. So then the second question is there qualitative and quantitative research? And I gave you some examples of qualitative research that's been published over the years. And then I try to address a specific scientific question. Is it possible to tell the difference between alienation and loyalty? And I have left hanging the next scientific question. Is it possible to tell the difference between alienation and estrangement? Oh, by the way, this is my advertisement for today. Most of you belong to the PASG. If you don't, you're welcome to join. You just go to this website and you go to contact us, and we'll figure out how to take care of it. But I think we have a few times for some questions or comments. And Demosthenes is ready to take his microphone to people.
We do. We have time for questions about the scientific foundation. Sir, you got a question?
Good morning. Thank you. So my question is, how do you explain this kind of difficulty for recognition? Is it political or is it professional and territorial? Is it legal? I mean, what would be your explanation for the difficulties for this concept to be accepted?
So I think the question is showing up. Tom, isn't that correct? If people use the microphone, I don't really need to repeat the question. But it has to do with how come there's so much rejection of alienation. I think there are different reasons. I think the simplest explanation is that when people get divorced, the participants in the divorce themselves develop extremely polarized view of their situation. They think that they're correct, not everybody, but in some of these, and the other side, the other parent is totally wrong. And there's a strong tradition of that, and the legal system makes that even worse, brings out the worst of that. And then they get, attorneys get on their respective sides, and so the attorneys adopt this idea that one side is going to be totally correct and the other side is going to be totally wrong. And then the people get their respective therapists and the therapists, and so the whole system is set up to create polarization, that people have opposite opinions. And that's a systemic problem, at least in most countries. And so it's hard to get a distance from that and say, well, maybe this one's right, and in another case, maybe the other one's right, and so on. But I think that's at least part of the reason why. I think there are other reasons. I think some scientists truly become unscientific for maybe their own personal reasons.
Okay, how about another question?
Michael, thanks for that. You used that young girl's example, that young person's example, 14-year-old girl saying, as an example of parental alienation, that she was saying that sometimes it was easy just to stick with one parent. But isn't actually that illustration of the problem that so many people will see exactly that statement as being not alienation, as being not something sinister and not abusive, merely what children do in those circumstances?
Yeah, that's a good idea, is that maybe that's normative for children to have these opinions. Well, I don't think it is. The vast majority of children really want to have two parents. Most children do. Even parents who are not very nice, they still want to have a relationship with that parent. Parents who aren't very nice, the child says, I really want to see daddy, I just wish he wouldn't drink so much. And so if the child says, I don't want to see the parent, and it's not based on reality, then that's not normative. In other words, if the child says, I went to daddy's house, and I don't like going there. Why? Because I don't like the way my room is decorated. And then you say, well, okay, what are we going to do about that? And she says, it doesn't matter, I never want to see him again. In other words, if the child literally says, I never want to see daddy again because I don't like the way my room is decorated, is irrational. And so that's not a normal reaction of a child. That's how we can tell the difference.
Okay, another question? Let me bring you the microphone.
Thank you. I will return to the definition of the phenomenon. It is when the child allies himself with herself. But isn't it the parent that is the active agent? And shouldn't it be a definition about a parent misusing the trust of a child?
It depends on how much data you want to put into the definition. And people actually do have different definitions which have different amounts of information in them. I guess the definition I gave is the manifest symptomatology is the child rejects the parent. And clearly the cause of it was that big red arrow. There's a parent who causes the child to reject the parent. And I guess I usually just say that in a separate sentence than in the definition itself.
Any more questions? Neil?
By the way, I can tell you that I invited the secretary of the Nobel Committee for the medical science, Professor Thomas Perlman. But I don't know if I haven't seen him here. But
If he's here, I'm happy to talk.
But my question is very simple, very brief question. Could you just, in a few words, describe what would be the future of research most needed? What would you say is the emphasis we should stress? We should focus on what is most important as a research field. How do we further from here, from the knowledge state we have today?
Well, just in a sentence, and I think this would probably be my last question so we can move on. Research, what do we need? We need lots and lots of research, but the major headings are prevention, and we're going to hear more about prevention tomorrow. We need to do research on prevention. How can we avoid getting into this hole? We need research on treatment. There are interventions that seem to be helpful, but we need to be able to define treatment in terms of mild, moderate, and severe cases. And I think that we need research about proving that the symptoms are present. In other words, there are 8 symptoms of alienation, and my study here about splitting really pertain to one of those 8 symptoms, which is the child engages in splitting or does not engage in, the inverse of splitting. But anyway, that's one of the 8 symptoms. And the other 7, I think would be interesting to be able to find data or tests for the other 7. Thank you all very much. We have a big day today.
Dr. Bernett. Okay, well, we are all on squeaky chairs, and that's okay.